You have been working for years, building, studying, executing, doing everything the system told you to do, and yet the people at the very top keep pulling further ahead, not closer. That is not a coincidence. That is a design. In this video, I am going to show you the exact strategies Singapore's billionaires use to stay ahead, stay invisible, and stay untouchable, strategies that were never meant to reach you. By the end, you will understand why the rules you were given were never the rules they were playing by. Please subscribe and activate the button to help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can bring you more relevant content, and so YouTube can notify you when we publish new videos. The most important thing Singapore's billionaires do not want you to know is the one that would change everything if you understood it completely. The game you are playing is not the game they are playing. Not because they are smarter, not because they worked harder, sacrificed more, or possessed some innate quality that was simply absent in the people who did not reach their level, but because, at a specific point in their development, early enough that the decision shaped everything that followed, they stopped competing in the game that everyone else was running and entered a different one entirely. A game with different rules, different metrics, different time horizons, and different entry requirements. A game that is, by design, almost completely invisible to everyone still running the original one. And here is the part that should make you stop and read the next paragraph twice. The original game, the one you were given, the one that school and culture and every conventional success narrative prepares you to play, was designed to be just compelling enough to keep the most capable people fully invested in it. The promotions are real. The returns are real. The progress is real. It is not a fraud. It is a container. A carefully constructed competitive environment that absorbs the energy, the ambition, and the productive capacity of the people who were never shown that a different game existed. The billionaires at the top of Singapore's financial hierarchy are not winning the same game you are playing. They stepped out of it before you knew it was possible to step out. They stepped into the competition for position, not position in the conventional sense, not seniority, not market share, not the visible metrics of professional achievement that the original game rewards. Strategic position, the specific, structural, long-horizon positioning that determines not who wins the current cycle, but who is best placed when the cycle turns. Who has the relationships that produce access before opportunities become public. Who has the information that allows decisions to be made before the market prices the decision correctly. Who has the optionality, the preserved, deliberately maintained capacity to act, that most participants have traded away in pursuit of near-term performance. This is the first thing they do not want you to know, because understanding it does not simply make you a better player of the original game. It makes you question whether the original game was ever the right one to be playing. Here is how the competition for position actually works in practice, and why it produces outcomes that look, from the outside, like extraordinary luck or prescient genius. The participant competing for a position does not ask, what is the best investment available right now? They ask, what position, built correctly over the next 5 years, will give me access to the best investments available in 10? The question seems inefficient to anyone optimizing for near-term returns. It is the most efficient question available to anyone with a long enough horizon to let the answer compound. In Singapore, that horizon is cultural. The city's development history, the specific, compressed, extraordinarily rapid transformation from a city with no natural advantages to one of the world's most sophisticated financial centers, produced a generation of wealth builders who understood, from direct observation, what long-horizon positioning could produce. They watched the people who positioned themselves correctly in the 1970s and 1980s generate outcomes in the 1990s and 2000s that no amount of near-term tactical brilliance could have produced from scratch. They drew the correct conclusion. The conclusion was not that they needed to make better investments. It was that they needed to build better positions from which to make investments. And the difference between those two objectives, between optimizing the decision and optimizing the conditions under which decisions are made, is the entire gap between ordinary success and the kind of multi-generational, structurally durable wealth that Singapore's elite have built and maintained. You were never taught this distinction. Not in school, not in any conventional financial education, not in any of the success narratives that the culture produces in abundance, because the people who benefit from the original game being fully subscribed have no interest in the distinction being widely understood. The container works best when the people inside it believe it is the entire universe. You are about to see outside it. Here is what the position competition produces in practice. and why it is so difficult to access from the outside, no matter how much capital or intelligence you bring to the attempt. The most valuable asset in Singapore's elite financial world is not money. It is not even access, though access is closer to the truth. It is the specific quality of relationship that only time and demonstrated reliability can produce, and that produces, in return, a flow of information and opportunity that no amount of capital can purchase directly. Think about the last significant opportunity you missed, not because you lacked the capital, not because you lacked the competence to execute, because you did not know about it until it was already closed, already allocated to people who were inside a circle you did not know existed, at terms that were never made available to the broader market, through a process that generated no public record of its occurrence. That is not bad luck. That is the system functioning exactly as designed. The off-market transaction, the private deal, the quiet allocation, the opportunity that moves between known parties before any public process begins, is not the exception in Singapore's most significant financial markets. It is the standard operating procedure for the transactions that matter most, the real estate that never appears on any listing, the company stake that changes hands without any public announcement, the fund allocation that goes to a specific investor before the fund is technically open, at terms that the public raise will not offer. These transactions do not happen because the parties are hiding something illegal. They happen because the parties trust each other, because the trust was built over years of demonstrated reliability, and because the specific quality of that trust allows transactions to proceed at a speed, with a simplicity, and at terms that the public market's requirement for price discovery and formal process makes impossible. The person outside this world sees the outcome, the wealth that accumulated, the position that was built, and assumes that superior analysis or superior capital produced it. The person inside the world knows that what produced it was something that cannot be acquired after the fact, at any price. It was a presence. In the right rooms, over the right years, building the right relationships before anyone knew which relationships would be the right ones. And here is the mechanism that makes this most painful for the people who understand it too late. The relationships that produce off-market access are not built at the moment the opportunity exists. They are built years before, in contexts that have no obvious commercial relevance to the opportunity that will eventually flow through them. At events, in conversations, through introductions that seem, at the time, like simply being in the right place. The person who was present at the right dinner in 2015, who behaved correctly, who was genuinely useful to someone whose judgment mattered, who followed up in the way that demonstrated they understood the relationship's value, without being transactional about it. That person received a call in 2019 about an opportunity that was never made public. The person who arrived in 2018, with more capital and more credentials, never received that call. Not because they were less qualified, because the relationship that produced the call was built before they arrived. This is the information that should change how you think about every professional relationship you are currently in. Not instrumentally, not as a reason to treat relationships as purely commercial investments, which is both morally impoverished and strategically counterproductive, because the people who can provide the most access are also the people most capable of detecting when a relationship is being pursued for its utility rather than its genuine quality. But as a reason to understand that the relationships you build now, in contexts that seem to have no obvious commercial relevance, with people whose current position does not obviously justify the investment of your time and attention, are the relationships that will or will not produce access in 10 years. The Singapore billionaire who has been having lunch with the same person every quarter for 15 years, through market cycles and career transitions, and the complete transformation of every relevant industry around them, that relationship is not a friendship that happens to produce commercial benefits. It is a commercial asset that has been built with the patience and consistency that only genuine interest and genuine reliability can sustain over 15 years. You cannot fake that. You cannot compress it. You cannot buy your way into a relationship that was built across 15 years of demonstrated trustworthiness by arriving with a larger check. The check is available to many people. The 15 years are available to no one who did not spend them. The negotiation is where the gap between the Singapore billionaires' approach and every conventional framework becomes most visible, and where the lesson most directly applicable to anyone outside the system lies. You have been in negotiations. Professional negotiations, commercial negotiations, the specific encounters where what you walk away with is determined by your preparation, your leverage, and your ability to manage the interaction in real time. And you have probably been taught, in some form, the standard framework. Know your BATNA. Understand your counterpart's interests. Create value before claiming it. These principles are correct. They are also at the level where Singapore's most significant transactions happen, almost entirely beside the point. Here is why. The conventional negotiation framework assumes that the negotiation is the primary event, that the relationship between the parties begins when the formal process begins, that leverage is built during the negotiation, and that the outcome is determined by how skillfully the parties manage the interaction in the room. Singapore's most successful operators have almost always won before they enter the room. Not through superior BATNA, though the BATNA is usually excellent. Through the specific, long-horizon relationship investment that means, by the time a significant negotiation reaches the stage where terms are being discussed, both parties already understand what the deal needs to look like. The formal negotiation is not a competition. It is a translation, the conversion of a mutual understanding, built over years, into a structure that the advisors and institutions can process. This produces outcomes that look, from the outside, like the Singapore operator has unusual leverage, which they do, but the leverage was not built during the negotiation. It was built in every conversation, every demonstrated act of reliability, every moment across the preceding years where the relationship was invested in without any specific transaction in mind. You feel this every time you enter a negotiation cold, with a counterparty you do not know, in a context where neither party has any basis for trust beyond the formal process, and find that the friction is enormous. Every term is contested. Every concession is extracted rather than offered. Every interaction carries the specific inefficiency of two parties, who do not trust each other, managing the risk of that distrust. Now imagine the same negotiation conducted between two people who have known each other for a decade, who have been through difficult moments together, who have each, at various points, protected the other's interest when no contract required it. The friction is not simply reduced, it is structurally different. The conversation is not about what each party can extract. It is about what the deal needs to look like for both parties to execute it with genuine commitment. That conversation produces better outcomes for both parties than any adversarial negotiation could produce for either. And the Singapore billionaire who has spent years building the relationships that make those conversations possible has access to a category of transaction, better terms, faster execution, lower friction, deeper mutual commitment to the outcome, that the person who arrives without the relationship history simply cannot access. Here is the most uncomfortable part. The relationships that produce those negotiations are not built by people who are thinking about the negotiations they will eventually produce. They are built by people who are genuinely interested in the other person, genuinely invested in their success, genuinely present in the relationship for reasons that have nothing to do with any specific commercial outcome. The strategic return is real. The genuineness is also real. Both things are true simultaneously, and the only way to build the relationship that produces the strategic return is to be genuinely in it, not performing genuineness as a strategy, but being the kind of person whose genuine engagement with other people happens to also produce, over time, the most commercially valuable network available. Which means the lesson is not, be strategic about your relationships. The lesson is, be the kind of person whose genuine relationships are worth being strategic about. That distinction is the one most people miss, and missing it produces a specific, recognizable failure mode. The person who tries to build the Singapore Billionaires network by treating relationships as instruments, who is correctly identified as doing so by exactly the people whose trust they are trying to build, and who ends up with neither the genuine relationships nor the strategic returns. The system is not a trick you can run. It is a character you have to develop. But here is what none of this explains, and what most people who study the Singapore elite never reach. The strategies, the relationships, the positioning, the negotiation architecture, all of it is learnable in principle. Yet the gap between understanding it and executing it consistently remains enormous. What comes next reveals why. And the answer is going to be more uncomfortable than anything we have covered so far. Here is the reversal that makes everything else make sense. And that explains why the gap between you and the people at the top is not primarily a gap of information, of capital, or even of strategy. It is a gap of formation, not education in the formal sense. Formation, The specific, deep, habituated orientation toward the world that is built through years of specific experience in specific environments. And that produces, in the people who have it, a way of seeing and deciding and relating that operates automatically, under pressure, in real time, without requiring conscious application. You can read every book ever written about long-term thinking. You can intellectually commit to a 50-year horizon. You can understand, in complete theoretical detail, why patience compounds and why near-term optimization is a trap. And then a real opportunity arrives. A specific, time-pressured, commercially compelling opportunity with a short window, and the formation that was never built in the right environment at the right time produces exactly the decision that the theory said to avoid. Not because you forgot the theory, because knowing the theory is not the same as having the formation. The Singapore billionaire who operates with a genuine 50-year horizon is not applying a principle in real time. They are expressing a disposition that was built over years of specific experience, of watching long-horizon decisions produce outcomes that near-term thinking could not have generated, of being in environments where patience was modeled and rewarded, of having the specific mentors and cultural contexts that made the long horizon feel natural rather than difficult. That disposition is the most valuable thing they have, and it is the thing that is most completely unavailable to anyone who did not develop it in the right environments at the right time. This is what the system does not want you to understand, because understanding it forces a question that the system benefits from you not asking. Not, how do I learn the strategies? But why was I never placed in the environments where the formation happens? The answer to that question is not comfortable. The environments where the formation happens, the schools, the networks, the early professional experiences, the specific mentorship relationships that calibrate judgment at the critical stages of development, those environments are not randomly distributed. They are concentrated, by design and by compounding, in the hands of families and institutions who have been controlling access to them for generations. The child who grows up inside a serious Singapore family is not simply wealthier than you. They are differently formed, not better, in any moral or intellectual sense, but specifically formed for the specific game that produces the specific outcomes at the top of the hierarchy. The formation happened before they were old enough to choose it, and it produced capacities that are genuinely difficult to develop from scratch in adulthood. This is not a reason for despair, it is a reason for precision. Because the formation gap, while real, is not total. It is not an absolute barrier that no external entrant has ever crossed. It has been crossed, repeatedly, by people who understood what they were crossing and invested in the crossing with the same patience and consistency that the formation itself requires. The path is longer from outside the formation. It requires substituting time and deliberateness for the ambient absorption that happens automatically inside the right environments. It requires being honest about which capacities are genuinely present and which are intellectually approximated, and then building the genuine versions, through specific experiences specifically chosen for that purpose, before attempting to operate at the level where the difference is consequential. And it requires one thing above all else that no strategy can substitute for: the willingness to be in development for longer than the system tells you is necessary. The system, the original game, the container, rewards visible progress on a visible timeline. The promotion after 2 years. The fund raised after 3. The public validation that confirms you are on track, ahead of schedule, performing above expectations. This reward structure feels like support. It is a trap. Because the formation that produces the outcomes at the top of Singapore's hierarchy is not built in 2 years, or 3, or 5. It is built across a decade of specific experience. And the people who interrupt the building to collect the reward have traded the formation for the recognition. The recognition is temporary. The formation is permanent. And the permanent thing, built correctly, produces every temporary reward eventually, without the permanent thing being traded away to get them early. There is a final thing that Singapore's billionaires do not want you to know, and it is the most important one in this entire video, because it is the one that actually changes something about your position right now. Regardless of where you are starting from, the system has a vulnerability. Not a flaw in any technical sense, not a loophole that can be exploited through a clever maneuver or an information advantage that can be leveraged into a shortcut. A structural vulnerability built into the architecture of the system itself that the people at the top are aware of and that they manage, imperfectly, in every generation. The system requires inheritance. It perpetuates itself through the transmission of formation, relationships, and position from one generation to the next. And that transmission, for all its sophistication and all the resources invested in making it reliable, is imperfect. It fails at a specific and predictable rate, not always, not even often, but often enough to create, in every generation, gaps in the network. Positions that become available because the person who held them did not transmit the formation correctly. Relationships that are warm but underinvested because the inheritor has the access but not the depth. Institutions that are open to new entrants because the internal culture has calcified in ways that make genuine capability more valuable than inherited position. These gaps are not advertised. They are not visible from the outside, but they are real, and they are the specific entry points through which the most significant external entrants into Singapore's elite networks have historically made their moves. The gap is not entered through money. It is entered through the one thing that the formation gap makes genuinely scarce at the top of every inherited network. Capability so specific and so genuine that the network needs it more than the network needs to protect itself from an outsider. Every serious network, at every level of sophistication, has a version of this. The relationship that was built on institutional trust rather than genuine capability. The position that was granted based on inheritance rather than demonstrated judgment. The gap between what the network claims to be able to do and what it actually can do, a gap that grows over generations of imperfect transmission until it becomes a liability that the network is willing to open a door to address. The person who enters through that gap does not enter as a supplicant. They enter as a solution. And the difference in how they are received, the difference between someone the network is tolerating and someone the network genuinely needs, is the difference between a transactional relationship and a structural one. Structural relationships produce structural returns. And structural returns, built from a genuine position inside a network that needed you and chose you for what you actually are rather than what you were born into, are more durable than any inherited position, because they are held not by the right of birth but by the ongoing demonstration of the value that produced them. This is the final thing to understand about what Singapore's billionaires do not want you to know. It is not that the system is impenetrable, it is that the system presents itself as impenetrable specifically to discourage the attempts that would actually succeed. The person who looks at the surface and concludes that the entry cost is too high, the connections required, the formation needed, the timeline demanded, and turns back to the original game, has done exactly what the system needed them to do. The person who looks at the same surface and asks where the gaps are, what specific capability is genuinely scarce inside the network, and what the 10-year path to building that capability and demonstrating it to the right people actually looks like, that person is playing the right game. Not the same game as the people at the top. The right game, from where they currently stand, toward the position that their current reality makes available. The map is not the territory. The Forbes list is not the network. The visible success is not the power. And the closed door is not always locked. Sometimes it is simply heavy, and it opens for people who know where to push. You were given the rules of a game designed to keep you exactly where you are. You were never supposed to know that different rules exist. Now you do. What you do with that knowledge is the only question that was ever yours to answer. Luxury power exists for one reason only: to reveal what the elite pay to hide. Subscribe to Luxury Power and hit the bell now. Every week a new secret is uncovered. Drop in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing our global audience. Everything you saw here is based on real cases, verified contracts, and documented facts. We don't glorify wealth, we dissect it. Do you still think money buys freedom? Tell us in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to see the truth. And remember, even the most expensive life can be a gilded cage. See you in the next video.